Hello everyone, and welcome again to ChessLecture.com. My name is Dana Mackenzie, and today we're going to have the first installment of what I'm hoping will be a long-running series called Learn from Your Fellow Amateurs. So as a lot of you have probably seen on the website, I've invited anybody who's a member of ChessLecture.com to send in their games, and I will pick one game each month to give a lecture on. And the games can be either chosen because they're good, or because they're instructive, or because they're exciting, or unusual. So please feel free to contribute your own games. This will be continuing. So I'm going to give you our first winner today, but we'll have another competition for February, and you can start sending your entries in right away. So this month's winner is Michael Olderhoff, who's been a member of Chess Lecture since August, and he wrote to me that he just started playing tournament chess in February of 2007. So he's been at it for less than a year, and his rating is already up to 1600, which is really impressive. Anyone who gets their rating to 1600 in their first year is doing a pretty good job. So congratulations to Michael, both for that improvement and also for winning the first prize for learning from your fellow chess amateurs. So this game was played in September of 2007. Michael Olderhoff is black, and his opponent is a player named Stan Navratsky, who is white, and Stan Navratsky's rating was about 1700 at this time, and Olderhoff was around 1460 at the time this game was played, since moved up to 1600. So let's get started. Well, let me say a little bit about why I picked this game. To me, first of all, there were some very good submissions this month. I was really impressed with some of them. There were at least 3 or 4 games that I would feel very happy doing a lecture on, and I may in fact do a lecture on one of them in the future. So if you submit a game once, it's submitted forever. So of all the selections, though, I like this game the best because first of all, it embodies a lot of what I'd like to see in a good amateur chess game. It was very hard fought. It had a few mistakes, but there were very instructive mistakes, some things that I think players at several different levels can learn from. And also this game really ties in with several themes that I've talked about in previous lectures, and I'll point these out as we go through the game. So it was really an easy choice for me to make this month. So the game begins with the Caro-Kann defense, e4, and Michael plays c6, the Caro-Kann, d4, d5, knight c3, the main line, d takes e, knight takes e4, knight f6, which is also one of 2 main lines here, knight takes knight, and g-pawn takes knight. And I won't go over these opening moves in detail, but let me just say that the capture with the g-pawn sort of has a reputation as the sharper of the 2 possibilities here. Black is trying to stake out a little bit more of a presence in the center, but at the same time, he's weakening his king side a bit, particularly the h-pawn is now isolated. And also, perhaps, the pawn on f6 might get in the way of black's development a bit. But on the other hand, black gets compensation in the form of an open g file, which turns out to be extremely important in this game. So, as always in chess, there's some pluses and minuses, but this is a good active line for black to play. White plays bishop e3, black plays bishop f5, knight to f3, e6, bishop to d3. So, won't say anything in particular about these moves, except well, white's development of the bishop to e3 is not completely standard. Usually white wants to be a little bit more active with that bishop and put it on f4. But I think that's a fairly minor issue here. Both sides have played the opening very reasonably. And now we get what I consider the first interesting decision of the game. So ordinarily, in the Caro-Kann, black is perfectly happy to trade the light square bishops, because the light square bishop is potentially black's bad bishop, although he has gotten it outside the pawn chain, so it's not really that bad. And the white square bishop is white's good bishop. So black is usually happy to make this trade, but Michael decided not to, and instead played bishop to g4. This move surprised me a little bit. The reason is that this move actually wastes a tempo, and I think that it's possible that amateurs are a little bit more willing to waste tempi in this fashion than masters are. First of all, what does it mean to waste a tempo? It means moving a piece twice in the opening, or taking two moves to do something that you could have done in one move. So here the bishop went to f5 and then to g4, so it wasted a tempo. And the reason wasting tempi is bad, if you listen to Jesse Kry's lectures, he gave a lecture one time on that 3 tempi are worth a pawn. And that's a little bit too sort of blanket a statement. Sometimes 3 tempi are worth a pawn, and sometimes they aren't. But I'd say, as a general rule, wasting a tempo is a little bit comparable to wasting a quarter of a pawn. So if you think of pawn as being worth $1, every time you waste a tempo, you're handing your opponent a quarter. And you don't want to do that too many times, or you don't want to do it without good reason. Now, in this case, I think there is a fairly good reason for this move, which is that black is setting up a somewhat inconvenient pin on the knight on f3. So this decision is defensible. I think it's playable, although it may not be what I would have chosen to play as black. White castles, and this also is an interesting decision, and a very important one for the future course of the game. If I were playing white, I would have thought very carefully before making this move, because white is putting his king on the g file, which is already a half-open file that black can easily put his rooks on. And so the pawn on g2 could easily become very sensitive and vulnerable to attack here. And if white pushes that pawn to g3 to make it less vulnerable, then he's weakening the white squares around his king. So I think castles is also a playable move, but I would have strongly considered some other options here. For example, I think that one option to consider would be queen to e2, followed by castling queenside. Castling queenside seems much more consistent with the nature of the position. The king is not going to be as vulnerable there as he is going to be on the g file. Another interesting idea is possibly playing c3 and developing the queen at c2. So, for example, queen b6, which is the computer's recommendation, and queen c2. And I want to bring this up because some of you might say, well, this can't be any good because white is allowing black to wreck his pawn structure with bishop takes knight. But I think that, I think a lot of players overrate or over-worry about pawn structure. Really beginning players don't think about pawn structure at all. They aren't even aware of it. But then at a certain point you learn about things like doubled pawns and isolated pawns and so forth. And then you're so worried about them that you forget about the other aspects of the position. So here, yes, white has allowed his pawns to be doubled, but look what he gets in return. First of all, he's got his queen and bishop on a beautiful diagonal, already threatening to win a pawn on h7. Also, white has opened up the g-file himself, so he's going to be able to put his own rooks on the g-file and contest black's control of that. And of course, white is going to castle queenside. There's obviously no thought of castling kingside anymore. And also, another nice thing about this line is that white is refusing on principle to lose a tempo. he's saying, okay, not only have you wasted one tempo with bishop to g4, I'm going to actually tempt you to give up another tempo with bishop takes knight. And so white's development in this position is way ahead of black's. And so that's another thing to like about this line. So anyhow, that's just an idea. But as I said, castles, which was the move played in the game, is perfectly playable. It's just, I'd say, not maybe the most principled response to black's move. Black continues bishop d6. White plays h3, bishop to h5, bishop to e2. And now we see the cost to white of having castle queenside. He's still worried about that pin on his knight, and in order to develop his queen, he's got to break that pin, and so he's got to waste a tempo himself with bishop to e2. And so as a result, black no longer is a tempo behind. Okay, black continues knight to d7, simple development. White plays rook e1. Black plays queen c7. And now white makes a terrible blunder, g4. Now, why is this a mistake? Well, some of you may have listened to my lecture on called Strategic Decisions 101, When Should I Chase the Bishop? And this is exactly the sort of position I talked about in that lecture. And the answer is you do not want to chase the bishop when it creates weaknesses that your opponent can exploit. By playing g4, white is creating weaknesses on h4, on f4, and also most particularly on the g file. So this pawn on g4 at the moment looks well defended, but all black has to do is retreat the bishop and then play h5, and he'll immediately start getting pressure on that g-pawn. And then he can put one rook on the g-file, another rook on the h-file, and be threatening to open up those files against white's king. And it's just an extremely dangerous situation for white. So this is just a very bad move strategically. So you don't even want to do this if your opponent has the rook still on the h-file. But you especially don't want to do it if the g-file is open as well. So white should not have even considered this move. Instead, he should have continued with more calm, logical, strategic moves like c4, trying to expand on the queen side and in the center. So, anyway, g4, very panicky move, not at all good. Black plays rook g8, getting right on the g-file, pitting the pawn. And then white plays another curious move, king to f1, which, I think most strong players would have automatically played king to h1 here. King to f1 just kind of leaves the king side, the g and h files, in complete limbo. It's like white's abandoning them. And so this creates an opportunity for black, as we'll see in a couple of moves, to really penetrate into white's king side. Black now retreats his bishop because it was being attacked. And white plays knight to h4. Again, a really, really risky move. Here white's king side has all these weaknesses, and yet he's trying to attack on the king side, which just makes no sense. He should be trying to expand in the center on the queen side. With knight h4, he creates even more weaknesses, so the square h2 is now completely uncovered, undefended. And so here Michael comes up with a very interesting idea, one I like a lot and would have been very tempted to play myself. Turns out that it's perhaps not really the best for black. But the flaw in this idea is quite subtle and is something that I think that I learned from too in going over this game. So Michael plays the move bishop to b4, which is a great idea. So the idea of this move is that black is trying to get his queen to h2, because once he gets his queen there, he'll be threatening checkmate in one. And, that's why king to f1 was such a questionable move, because it just opened up the square h2 for black to penetrate into. So So black basically, I think, looked at this position and said, how can I get my queen to h2? And so the answer is you have to move your bishop out of the way. Now you could move your bishop, say, to e7, but it's much better, if you can, to move your bishop to some place where it's attacking something, because this forces white to defend the threat against his rook on e1, and so white is not going to have time to play a move like king g2, which would defend the square h2. So white has to play c3, and now black is able to penetrate with his queen to h2, and as I said, he's now threatening mate in one move. So white cannot afford to take the bishop on b4. So, and what can white do? He's got to defend h1. So really the only move for him here is bishop to f3, which is what he played. Now, here we get to an interesting position, which is the unfortunate drawback of queen to h2. So Michael plays here queen takes pawn check, which is certainly the natural move. I mean, it looks great. It's forking the king and the knight, so threatening to win a piece. But there's a little catch, which neither player noticed, which is that white could have played here king to e2, and after queen takes knight, rook to h1 would trap black's queen. And so black would have nothing better than going queen takes rook, queen takes queen, and retreating the bishop to d6. And here, the material is nominally equal. You have basically a queen for a rook, a knight, and a pawn. However, I think white's position is definitely a little bit better, because his queen is very actively posted, pressuring the h-file, pressuring the long diagonal, and white has two bishops which are promising. So, and in general, the queen actually, if I have a queen against a rook and a knight, I'm usually going with the queen. Queen against rook and bishop, maybe less so, but queen against rook and knight, I'd say the queen is better. So the lesson here is actually one that you'll see in many chess books, which is that it's always dangerous to go pawn hunting with your queen deep in your opponent's position. And usually that pawn hunting takes place on the queen side. It's not quite so common to see it on the king side as in this case, which is why I think both players missed it, and maybe I would have missed it too. But this kind of shows you have to look carefully before you leap into such a committing move with your queen. So again, I really liked black's idea here, but it does run into this unfortunate tactical flaw. However, Michael's opponent didn't see that, and so he basically just sees black's threatening to win the knight, and so he interposes the knight with g2, knight to g2. So black has gotten sort of a reprieve here, and the question now is, what should black do about it? Well, unfortunately, Michael still didn't see the danger to the queen, and so he plays a move here that has to be considered a blunder, which is bishop to d6. So let's ask ourselves, what should black do now that he's gotten a reprieve? What should he do to rescue his queen and at the same time not lose the bishop on b4? Well, the key is to continue thinking aggressively. Always think in terms of seizing the initiative. And this is a point that I'm going to make over and over in this game. In this game, the importance of the initiative is just tremendous. So how is black going to keep the attack going and keep white from executing this plan of king to e2, followed by rook to h1? Well, there are a couple good possibilities. But one way to come up with the answer is to ask yourself, which of my pieces are not yet participating in the attack? Which pieces aren't doing anything? And when you look at black's position, you can identify a couple pieces that aren't doing anything. For example, the rook on a8 and the knight on d7, both are not really participating in the attack. And so the very best move here, which is also a very natural move, is to play castles. And so the idea behind this move is to make it possible for black's knight to jump to e5. So now if white plays king to e2, black's going to play knight e5, attacking the bishop on f3, and that bishop can't be defended. So black would win material right away. Or if white tries to rescue the bishop by playing bishop to e2, now the checkmates are back on the table. Queen to h1 checkmate. So castles would be a great dynamical move and I should point out also, if white grabs the bishop again, knight e5 is just going to be tremendous. The bishop can't be defended, and again, if it retreats, black gets a checkmate. So black is immediately winning back his sacrificed material. So that's a good example of dynamic chess, of continuing to press for the initiative instead of just playing a kind of routine defensive move like bishop to d6. But anyway, black played bishop to d6, and now white sees this idea of trapping the queen and plays king to e2. And at this point, actually, there's nothing black can do about this. He cannot get his queen out of trouble in time. But Michael plays knight to b6, and white plays rook to h1, trapping the queen. And here Michael says something very interesting. He says, at this point I would have resigned in the past, but remembering a lecture by Grigory Kaidanov about being a fighter kept me playing on, looking for the most practical try. Instead of lashing out to try to win back the material, I decided to just activate my pieces and make a game out of it. And I want to say what a great attitude and what a great comment to make. So, so always have the mentality of the fighter, and always you should keep looking for ways to activate your pieces and ways to make trouble for your opponent. Just because you lose some material doesn't mean the game is over. So at this point, black starts looking for ways that he can grab the initiative, and really from this point on plays just a beautiful game. So first he played bishop to h2, and white plays bishop to f4. Now the bishop cannot be defended. Okay, it's attacked twice, and still there's a question of how is the queen going to get out of here. But Michael has a nice idea here, which is to sacrifice the piece, sacrifice the queen for two pieces. So he plays queen takes knight, bishop takes queen, and bishop takes bishop, getting two pieces for the queen. Now, I should point out here that white was a little bit sloppy, a little bit careless, and we're going to see he continues to be careless after this move as well. So after Michael's move, queen takes knight, black could have played rook takes bishop. And notice that black's queen is still trapped. And so instead of getting two, black would only get a rook for the queen. And that's definitely much less compensation. It's, of course, two pieces is not theoretically enough compensation for the queen either, but it's better compensation than a rook would be. And in chess, you've always got to play for the, look for the best you can get and look for the slight advantages. So here, white was a little bit too casual, a little bit too, sloppy, as I said, and just sort of did the immediately obvious move, taking the queen, instead of thinking about how can he actually come out with the most material advantage. Okay, so slight mistake for white here then, going bishop takes queen and allowing bishop takes bishop. Okay, white continues queen to b3, black castles. And now let's talk about this position a little bit. So first of all, this whole game is going to be a great illustration of a theme that's very near and dear to me, which is, when are two pieces sufficient compensation for a queen? So those of you who've been listening to Chess Lecture for a while, remember that my very first lecture, called Nuke the Sicilian, was a game where I sacrificed a queen for two pieces. And I discussed in that lecture what it takes to get compensation, to make those pieces compensate for the queen. And so let me review that. So first of all, first and foremost, you need active piece play. You need very well coordinated pieces. And Black is getting there here. He's got two beautiful bishops, really raking into the heart of White's position. And also his knight can very easily jump to d5 and then can jump to f4 with a check. Also, another important ingredient here is that White's king is fairly unsafe here in the center. So Black may be able to open lines on the king side, on the e file, perhaps on the h file, and start finding good files for his rooks. Another thing I talked about in that lecture on Nuke the Sicilian is that your compensation, two pieces for the queen, is a lot better if the two pieces are bishops. So if you got two bishops for the queen, that's two bishops unopposed are a very, very strong fighting force. Now, in this position, the bishops are kind of unopposed. It's very difficult for White to exchange off his bishop for Black's bishop, or to oppose the Black bishop, the light-squared bishop's activity. So, for the time being, Black's bishops are very unopposed. And what's more is that if Black is able to play knight d5 and knight f4 check, then he will be able to trade the knight for the bishop, and then really have two bishops for the queen. Which is, as I said, still not sufficient compensation, but when you put all of those factors together, it adds up to a very dangerous position for White. So I think, White in this situation kind of felt, oh, I'm up a queen for two pieces. The game is just going to win itself. And that's absolutely not true. So in order to win this game, White has to fight for the initiative, the same way that Black is. And White can do it here. He's got more material. He should be able to grab the initiative. And the way to do it would be to play a4. So what's the thinking behind this move? Well, if you go back a couple of moves to, when we discussed how Black could keep the initiative going earlier, I said that one thing you can do is look at pieces that aren't doing anything. And one White piece that isn't doing anything is the rook on a1. Another White piece that could be doing more is the bishop on g2. It's got this great pressure along the long diagonal, but it needs help. It needs, other pieces to come and join in the attack. So the idea of a4 is that White is going to push the pawn onto a5, hitting the knight, and then he's going to push onto a6, where it hits the pawn on b7. And once that happens, Black's queen side is just going to collapse, and that bishop on g2 is going to turn into a monster along the long diagonal. So Black can't allow that to happen. So one thing, what he might play in response would be knight to d5, but then again, White will strike before Black is ready. White wants to keep the initiative going, and so he would play c4. Notice he does this before Black has a chance to move knight to f4. And so Black is forced to retreat his knight into a defensive position, either e7 or c7. And then, once Black does that, White could continue pushing the initiative. a5, threatening a6, very dangerous threat. Black would probably have to stop that with a6. And then at this point, White could now think about a move like rook on a to d1, now transferring his attention to the center of the board and to the move d5, which again would exploit the power of his bishop on g2 and would open up lines against Black's king. So that's how White should have played it, with an aggressive mentality, fighting for the initiative. But instead, he just plays another kind of sloppy move, rook on h to d1, which first of all, it's wrong because he should have been, if he's going to move any rook to d1, it should be the A rook. Because the rook on h1 was already doing good things. It was on an open file. It's preventing black from playing h5. So now that's a very valuable piece right where it is. And instead, white should be thinking about, what can I do with the other rook? So if he's got to move a rook to d1, it should have been the rook on a1. So another sloppy move, not fighting for the initiative, not thinking about the best places for his pieces. And now black is going to play f5. A nice idea. So basically he's trying to liquidate all these pawns on the king side so that his pieces will have unfettered attacking access to white's king. Now again, white's best move here is probably to play a4, because he's got to fight for the initiative too. And this threat is still strong. You know, he's saying, okay, go ahead and take the pawn on g4. I don't care, because I'm going to hit you with a5, and then I'm going to hit you with c4, and then I'm going to hit you with a6, and my attack is going to come first. But again, you know, white isn't thinking that way. He's just sort of playing connect the dots chess, and so he just defends his pawn, f3. And, you know, what a sad move to make. I mean, this is totally passive. Blocks the bishop's long diagonal, and doesn't help his king become any more secure. In fact, this is just going to help black open lines against the king. So, you know, very poor move, f3. So Michael is glad to trade pawns, and then he plays h5. Great move, which white allowed him by moving the rook off the h-file. And, you know, now white's last pawn on the king side is going to die, and his king is just going to be floating out here in space, unable to get to the queen side, and with all these lines opening up on the king side. So white goes pawn takes pawn, black goes bishop takes pawn check. And here Michael makes another interesting comment. So he says, I started feeling good at this point. Not sure if I had an advantage, but the position was at least unclear, and I have a huge initiative. Well, I completely agree, and I would say, oh yes, black definitely does have a huge advantage now. It's all in the attack. It's not in the material standings, but the fact that the white's king is now unable to get away from the attack. And maybe what white realized at this point was that he can't play bishop to f3 because of rook to g2 check. And the king would have to retreat to f1, and then black wins a piece with bishop takes bishop. And now black does have full material equality and is threatening mate in just a couple moves. So this game is over. So instead, white plays king to f1, offering the exchange. And now Michael plays another move that I really, really like. And this also goes back to my lecture, Nuke the Sicilian, where I said, when you have the two pieces for the queen, and you've got this attack going, you know, your pieces are well coordinated and everything, don't sell out too soon. You know, don't take the first opportunity to win back your material. Keep the pressure on, keep attacking, keep the initiative going. You know, over and over, I want to emphasize this point of the initiative. So, why would black want to trade the bishop for the rook? It would make no sense, because he's giving away a great attacker for a piece that's really doing nothing for the defense. So the bishop is worth more than the rook at this point. And so Michael realizes this, and he continues in good aggressive fashion with rook to g3. Very nice move, planning to double on the g-file. All right, so his opponent plays queen to c2, defending the g2 bishop. And now another big move, knight to c4, threatening a monster fork on e3, forking practically every piece that white's got. It's unbelievable. So white has to play rook to e1 to defend against that. And again, Michael does not want to just settle for winning the exchange. So he doesn't want to play knight to e3 check. he's got bigger things on his mind. He wants to checkmate White's king. So he plays the move knight to d2 check, which cuts off White's queen from the defense. So very nice move. So the king is now kind of all on his own on the king's side. And if White plays, for example, king to f2, then Black could just start piling up with rook to g8. And if White goes, say, bishop to e4 to rescue the bishop, then actually might be worth here taking a few seconds to see what you would play here as Black. So the computer finds a really nice move in this position, which is rook to h3, threatening checkmate. The threat's rook to h2. So, so what can White do to defend? Well, he might play something like rook to h1, but then he would still get checkmated. Bishop to e3 check, king to e1, rook takes rook check, bishop takes rook, and then rook to g1 checkmate. So this points out a good lesson for attacking, which is that when you have three pieces against a king that has no other pieces to defend, so three pieces against a king is usually, or at least often, checkmating material. So once you have a three-piece advantage in the neighborhood of the king, you should start looking for ways to set up a mating net. Or if you've got four pieces against one, as we do here, you should again start looking for mating nets. So, and this is why Black's attack is so incredibly strong here. He's actually got more than three. He's got 5 pieces, all concentrating on White's king. And White only has a couple pieces that are capable of defending, and that's just not enough. Okay, so instead of playing king f2, White played king to g1. And this also has a serious problem, which is that it's walking into a pin. And so now Michael plays bishop to f3, and White now has no way to hold on to his bishop. So he tries playing rook to e2, but now it's just a total disaster. Bishop takes rook. He now plays king f2. Michael plays bishop to d3, attacking the queen. Queen comes back to d1, and rook to g8. Once again, just look at this. We got 5 pieces attacking the king, and only 2 that are even vaguely able to defend the king. So, of course, Black is threatening to win the bishop, so, what can White do? He's got to move it. The only square he can move it to is h1, but now we get the same mating combination that we saw in the previous line with bishop to e3 check, and followed by king to e1, and rook to g1 checkmate. So instead of playing that, White resigned in this position. So very beautiful game by Michael, and a lot of fun, and I think there's some great lessons to learn from this. First of all, the lesson of not giving up when things go badly. If you lose material, don't give up. Try to look for ways to activate your pieces, try to seize the initiative, try to make the most of the position. Make your opponent work a little bit. And vice versa. If you're ahead in material, don't assume that the game is going to win itself. It's still equally important to continue fighting for the initiative, even if you're ahead in material. And also here we saw some great lessons on when not to chase the bishop with a move like g4, creating huge weaknesses on the king side. And we also got another very pretty example of when can 2 pieces sometimes actually compete against a queen and win. So, great game, Michael. Congratulations. So for the rest of you, please send in your games. Without you, this series cannot happen, and I'm really looking forward to seeing some more wonderful reader games or listener games in the next month. So for chesslecture.com, this is Dana Mackenzie signing out.